Hi, everyone. Welcome to this group session. Today, we'll be discussing a chapter from the book Life Divine by Sri Aurobindo, chapter number 4, Ascent Towards Supermind. But we'll also be discussing similar ideas from more speakers, such as Rudolf Steiner, Carl Jung, Blavatsky, and more. I'll give a super quick introduction to everyone here today. Angus Hawkins, he's a language trainer and professional coach based in Sweden. He's also a blogger. Dr. Don Salmon is a licensed clinical psychologist who has practiced mindfulness and other meditative techniques for over 45 years. Gary Kidgell is an esoteric astrologer and theosophist. He has a bachelor's degree in metaphysics from Claregate College. And Masi is a physicist with a philosophical and metaphysical inclination. He graduated in physics at the University of Padua and has a Ph.D. in physics at University of Trento. And Myreene Tobin, she's an expert in coaching and business management. She's also a long-time practitioner in Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. And last, me, I have a software engineering background. I did my master's in engineering from USC in Los Angeles. And I've been doing this channel, creating content in metaphysical topics for about 7 years now. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today and taking the time to read the chapter from Sri Aurobindo. Since we are focusing mainly on this chapter, but it's not limited to, and in this particular chapter, Sri Aurobindo presents ideas on evolutionary process and some conditions in evolutionary process. He mainly focuses on 3 conditions that are involved in an individual's evolutionary process. I was wondering if, Dawn, you would be open to start off this topic because you are already familiar with Sri Aurobindo's work very deeply, as well as you also referred to some ideas like triple transformation that I was not familiar with.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I have a brief opening, and it's going to be a little bit interesting and challenging because, my wife and I wrote a book on Mother Sri Aurobindo's integral psychology, and we didn't get to anything above the ordinary mind, all these levels of higher illumination, which folks in the audience will hear about later. And here's why we didn't do it. And I'm gonna offer everyone a challenge to frame the whole conversation. So I've probably browsed through or read thousands of books over 40 or more years on the integral yoga, talked with thousands of people, and for the most part, how do I say this? People talk about the illumined mind, higher mind, supermind, as if it's their next door neighbor or best friend. Oh yeah, well the supermind says, I've been in this for over 40 years, and I feel like I'm not qualified to talk about any of those levels. Now I will say something, but I know something about the Kagyu lineage. I know about the Theosophist. I'm not sure, Marco, maybe you can help me, Angus, the equivalent in Steiner, but I just searched all of the mentions of the higher mind levels in over 1,000 pages of letters. And it seems to me, Marco, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that in order to have a realization of what even Sri Aurobindo calls the higher mind, and Suma, you'll understand this very well as a non-dualist, you have to have a complete, stable realization of the self. So I would ask people rhetorically, not to answer, does anyone here have a complete, stable, 24-hour, full life realization of the non-dual, the Atman, the self? So I think that would be the, not in Kagyu, but in the Dzogchen, the Rigpa, or a true, absolute realization of emptiness. Or in Theosophists, they just talk about the Atman. They do talk about Atman or self. I'm not sure the equivalent, the true I, maybe in Steiner. Now, before I conclude by saying that we shouldn't talk about this, Marco has a wonderful book, Spirit Calls Nature, in which No, but it's a really important point, Marcus being shy. No, this is a great point. I've made this point for decades. You can talk about these things, and Mother Tribune, that when we get a level of openness and silence in the mind and receptivity in the heart, we can have intuitions, we can have glimpses. So in my sense, I'd like to keep in mind some humility that whatever I say is going to be perhaps, a glimpse. I try really hard when I talk about these things, not just to quote Mother Aurobindo or Steiner or Tibetan Buddhist or Maharishi, but if there's any glimpse of intuition of like, what does the higher mind mean? Forget the higher levels. What does that mean? Let me, can I do this? My last thing, I'll close here. Let me see if I can find something. Here, so someone wrote to Sri Aurobindo and said they had this experience. So Sri Aurobindo wrote back and said, oh yes, now this is before the higher mind, right? Your experience is a release from the limitations of body consciousness, opening to the wider being, which is universal, though it has an individual center. Everyone's following me, right? As this develops, one becomes aware of the true self, silent, illimitable, and this is a distinction he makes, and the cosmic consciousness, universal mind, universal prana, etc. The concentration at the apex, or the top above the head, is a station in, I think everyone's familiar with this, the 1,000-petaled lotus. There, now remember, this fellow has just become aware of the self. Beyond that, one becomes aware of states of mind above the ordinary human intellect or buddhi. Higher mind, above that, illumined mind. Okay, so that's the end of my frame. I just wanted to say, as we talk about this, I want to keep in mind, I have no idea what we're talking about, but we'll try to sort of honor what we possibly can glimpse. So that's my little opening. Oh, sorry.
May I answer?
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah. I completely agree with Don. In fact, when I saw for the first time that the topic was the ascent of towards supermind, my first question, maybe Suma, you can answer this later or now. Why beginning from this? Usually, this is the end point. This is the arrival point. This is the final aim, so to speak. It's not where I would suggest to start with Sri Aurobindo. On the other hand, I can also say, why not? And yeah, especially nowadays, where there is still this anthropocentric assumption, also in science, especially among scientists who say that they are not anthropocentric, they are against any form of human-centric vision of life, the universe, and science, and whatever. There is still this anthropocentric idea that human reason, the analytic mind, scientific realism is the ultimate tool to reach knowledge, to reach the perfect knowledge. Everything else is below this. They may not frame it in this way with these words, but subconsciously there is this assumption. So it can be a good philosophical exercise, even if we don't realize these things directly. But it can be a good philosophical exercise to read about, to know about that there are also higher levels, not just of consciousness, but I would call them also higher levels of cognition, of understanding, of seeing the world from a higher perspective. And because if we are not aware of this, we are still caged in this idea that rationality, analytic reason, is the ultimate arbiter of everything. So I suggest it as a good exercise. On the other side, it's also, I would say, yes, we cannot get to all these levels immediately without having a spiritual realization. But I think every one of us has sooner or later had some intuition, some form of aha moments, of flashes of insight, of intelligence that you don't know rationally where this comes from, but you know with absolute certainty that this is something that is not just mental. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's very useful as a starting point also of discussion.
Angus, I see your hand raised. And by the way, everyone, you don't have to wait for me to say anything. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, the reason I raised my hand is just it's easier to get a feel for where people are. It's like in the conversation. I'd like to support what you were saying there, Marco and Suma. Actually, the huge value in talking about these things that we don't actually, or we've only perhaps in part had as like a direct experience of ourselves. And why am I so strong in my conviction about that is because one of the things that happens when you do a deep dive into this activity that lives in all of us called thinking, when you really dig deeper into it, you realize you see with your conceptual life. If you don't have a concept of X, Y, and Z, you won't find it outside in nature. So the inner work has to be done first before we're actually going to see evidence that's like through our senses. So the development of clear concepts around in this field is, I would argue, and certainly Steiner would be strongly advocating the same thing. It's an essential prerequisite for doing so, for entering into this field consciously. Now, we can have experiences that are of a lot more mystical nature, but if we're going to approach this task in a conscious manner, then that means lots of these types of conversations. It means lots of reading. It means lots of creating clarity in our own minds about what is it we're actually talking about here. Where are the contradictions? And when we found concepts that we can work with, where can we find them? In Aurobindo, in Steiner, in Jung, in Blavatsky, and many other people, and in history as well. I'm just currently doing a deep dive into Greek mythology for reasons that I don't need to explain here, but it really is. It's breathtaking when you begin to look at this mythological thinking from a non-intellectual, rationalistic, the only thing real in the world is material perspective. Talking about experiences, because you put the challenge to us, Don. I happened to see your interview with Suma a while back, where you put her on the spot and you asked her about what I can't remember exactly what it was, the dreaming. It was something to do with dreaming, and you might be able to remember this experience. But I want to share this experience with you guys because it was how I would have directly answered Don's question, but it's also an answer to the question that Don again asked Suma, so when they last recorded. So when I was about, I think I was about 12 years old. One morning I woke up from a dream, and it was an unusually vivid dream. And I woke up and that was a bit of a strong experience. But normally I didn't think a great deal about it. So I went on throughout my day, and the actual content of that dream has disappeared. Second morning I wake up and there's this experience. Whoa, what just happened there? That was a continuation of the dream that I was having the night before. It's like you watch you're watching a series on TV, and it's like the next evening you watch the next series, and so you see there's a continuity in the flow. And I thought that was strange. It had never happened to me before. And then the third morning I woke up and I had a further continuation of the dream. And when I realized what had happened over those 3 mornings, the instinctive question that came to my mind was, Angus, which reality are you living in? Or which is the real reality? The one that you've just woken up into, or the one where there's also a continuity of consciousness before? Yes, that's my initial contribution.
I'll jump in. My original question was, how do you know if you're awake or dreaming? And the answer is, they're both real.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Can I say something that would follow on from what we've been discussing here, Suma?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, Don mentioned the lower and higher mind, the higher being the illumined mind. In theosophical writings, we talk of lower manas and higher manas, lower and higher. And spirituality is about building a bridge to the soul, what we call the Antakarana, or rainbow bridge. And this is built through spiritual disciplines, particularly meditation, but also through the exercise of the higher mind or abstract thought, which is the current frontier of human consciousness. Because at present, humanity has developed the intellect to the nth degree, but is yet to cross that frontier. How Jung spoke of archetypes as divine ideas being represented within the human psyche as symbols. And this is how we can develop the abstract mind. This follows on from what Angus was saying about his dreams. What he's essentially saying is the soul communicates to us through symbolism. Our experiences in life, the imagery, the events represent a lexicon through which the soul can communicate with us. We, of course, are challenged to think abstractly and understand this. We develop abstract thought through the study of myth, legend. My second book's on the Greek hero myths, actually, in terms of the hero quest. But this is a way in which we can communicate with the immortal aspect of our being through symbolism and through spiritual practices. This gets to what Don's saying. This leads to what Theosophy would call initiation or illumination, what Jung called individuation, where soul and personality are essentially fused as one. And we as personalities function as a spiritual instrument in accord with the intent of the divine. Of course, this is a very advanced stage of human evolution, which requires psychological integration so we can withstand the fiery energies of initiation, the ascent of Kundalini, and all the rest. So I just really felt it was a good time to mention this, but abstract thought is the current frontier of human consciousness. We develop it through thinking about things that are not related to our survival instincts or the pursuit of our desires, the kama manas of Hinduism. By thinking abstractly, we free the mind from the emotions. Of course, beyond the abstract mind, you have the intuition, the buddhi, you have the divine will of Atma. I just wanted to throw that in there. I felt it was exactly the right time to say this, following on from Don and then Angus.
Thank you for that, Gary. Myreene, I saw your hand raised. Would you like to share?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm both humbled by all of you erudite participants today and honored to be here. And I'm listening, and probably similar to colleagues on this session, I feel the same way. And all of you are speaking a number of things that I'm studying right now. I'm studying deep time and with Brian Schwimm and the mathematical cosmologists that are stating that the scientific fact that the Big Bang did occur 13 0.8 billion years ago. And I was relating mostly to Marco as he was speaking, knowing that he's a physicist, if I'm remembering his introduction correctly. And many of the things that you're talking about, I am learning from that perspective, the perspective of deep time. And we are learning just now and throughout about the universe evolving. And our consciousness is also evolving. And I was relating to Angus because of the places that he found it, and it was pretty broad. I too have had an experience like yours, Angus, and I don't know if we have time for me to share that or not, but I'm going to share it. It was when my daughter was born. And I always had, my firstborn, my daughter, I loved her so much. And I had this intuition that something was going to happen to her. And I started having these dreams. And she was a beautiful child. She was contented and peaceful, but she would have these attacks where she would just scream in pain. And it went on, she got to be 1, she got to be 2, she got to be 3. And it started that these attacks or episodes started happening more often. And I started having dreams of my daughter dying. And people said, oh, it's because she's your first child, because you're a mother, you're fearful that you'll lose her somehow, and so on. And the dreams started becoming clearer and clearer until one day I saw her in a hospital bed with tubes coming out of her everywhere. And of course, I was alarmed, and I had that dream probably 3 times. And then finally one day, I was, doing things about the house, and I was putting one of her blankets up in her closet, and I had this horrible vision of her literally dying and me having to lose her. And so the next time that she had one of those episodes, I took her to a doctor, and I can't tell you how many evenings I spent in emergency with this child in my arms, and people saying, oh, she's got a flu. It must be a flu. There's nothing, there's nothing wrong with her. And so finally, I don't think I tantrum, but I got very serious with the doctor. And I said, my child is ill. There is something wrong with this child. And you have to do something about it. And this doctor still said, well, we can put your child through this. But, you can put her through all these tests and it may show nothing. And I was adamant and said, that would be fine if it showed nothing, if these tests showed nothing. And it turned out that after all the tests were done, they called me and she had to go for emergency surgery because she had this minor thing wrong with her. And it was actually anatomical, that a blood vessel was over the ureter. And when the ureter was, and her kidney was squeezing to, she was in extreme pain, and then that was increasing. And so the startling piece was she had the surgery, and the specialist said she must have been in excruciating pain when she had these attacks. And so she went to surgery. Of course, I was the mother. I was right there at the door when she came back. And I saw exactly what I saw in those dreams. She was laying there. All the tubes were coming out of her. It was identical to what I had dreamed. So I'm sharing that with you. I don't share that with too many people, but I think I'm with an understanding audience here.
Is she okay now?
So yeah, she's fine now. She's just fine. When she was an adult, she had some issues with kidney stones a couple of times because it was scarring, and they had to do some intervention there. But she's just fine, thankfully. But I've had a couple of situations like that, and yeah, there's a different way of knowing. And I think, yes, we need to do deep meditation, and we have to work on it for a very long time. It's not something that you snap your fingers and say, hey, now I'm enlightened. But I really appreciated your introduction, Dawn, where you stated that no one can describe it. It's you can't define it, but I believe, in the learning that I'm doing now, it is our consciousness evolving. And the many practices we take to get there are varied, obviously, from the group. And Gary, I also have a really close friend who teaches anthroposophy. And in Germany every year. His name is Dr. Chris Werscher. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. And yeah, he teaches a number of the steps, and he's a very close friend. So I connect to that knowledge that way, certainly not as deeply as you do. Anyway, I'll stop talking now. Thank you for letting me be here. Yes.
Myreene, thank you so much for that beautiful story. I'm so glad to hear your daughter's okay. I'd like to try somewhat briefly to tie together what you said with what everyone else said. And I'll see if I can bring it back to daring to talk about the higher mind levels. So in that quote I just read, remember Aurobindo talked about the cosmic consciousness. So let me just say what he means and how it's different. It's a distinction from the higher mind. Let me try and put it in concrete terms. So yeah, I had a dream once. I went into a neighbor's apartment I'd never been in. I saw the entire layout. I saw where a certain book was on a bookshelf of 100 books. I saw the cover, and I made a pretense to go later. And it was exactly as I had seen it. And Mark and I gave a talk on near-death experiences last month where thousands of people are having those kinds of things. So I think this is consistent both with anthroposophy and theosophy, that not above the mind where we realize the self, but all of us, in fact, at this moment, as we're looking at the screen and feeling our bodies, there is a subliminal, behind the scenes, not below, not above, behind the scenes awareness of the prana or chi or life energy that supports the energy scientists think is the root of the universe. And behind that, there's these subtle mind planes we get into in these, what Jung calls the big dreams, where everything is like larger than life. And in fact, this is really cool. There's a psychologist, Jim Carpenter, he's a few hours north of me in Chapel Hill. He's come up with the first theory that may scientifically be legitimate to explain parapsychology. He calls it first sight, which means, I think, was Angus or Gary talking about, Angus talking about sensations, that behind it, before we perceive anything in the physical world, there's this, it calls a psi field. PSI means parapsychology, a psi field in which we're all connected, not the self, but we're all connected. And that our brain, our mind perceives that. And then we perceive the physical world, explains everything. He's got it in detail about telepathy, remote viewing in scientific terms. It's great. Gary, you're an astrologer, right? Are you an astrologer?
Yeah, esoteric astrology, yes.
I talked to an astrologer up at the Paul Brunton. He brought Romano Harsha to the West in 1994. And I said, you know, if your intuition was developed, would you really need an ephemeris? You could just look anywhere. You could look at my desk and look at this and look at the chords I have here. And just by intuiting the relationship, you'd probably know where sun, moon, Neptune, and that when we develop, and this is just cosmic consciousness, I suspect that all really good astrologers are not just analyzing the ephemeris, they're looking at a person and they're feeling this network of cosmic forces, manifesting in their expression. And so I've had astrologers who were brilliant. They didn't seem legitimate at all. I've had others who barely started, like, my God, they can tell me everything. And the last thing I want to bring up, Angus said something beautiful. And I have a question for you, Angus. Owen Barfield is one of Steiner's, most prominent disciples, talks about original participation. In ancient times, we were all just had this like myth, this natural sense, it wasn't fully conscious of being united with everything. And he talks about this period we're going through the last several thousand years where we feel this alienation, separation, more so the last few hundred years, as Marco and I have talked about materialism and physicalism, and there's final participation. So my sense is if you do the Tibetan Buddhist practice of analytic meditation where you analyze, like as Gary said, with the intellect, but you remain open to intuitions. And the way I learned it in Tibetan Buddhism is when you get into it, you stop thinking and you focus and open to the intuition. And Sri Aurobindo actually describes a method of going up to the higher mind levels where you actually, for those who like thinking, says you can actually think, like Marco taught a class on physics and spirituality recently, and I've never taken a class in physics. I don't know an atom from a wavicle, whatever. But as he's talking, I'm like trying to understand and think, and suddenly like, oh, those fields he's talking about, I can see the relationship with the cosmic conscious. It's not some new age nonsense. Like you really see it clearly. So that's a way. I'll leave it this. I still want to hear Angus' response to how are concepts different in our beta thinking, in our ordinary thinking, as opposed to does the concepts change in final participation, which sounds to me very much like Sri Aurobindo's talking about, a way of opening to the higher mind levels. I'll leave it there.
Great question there, Don. Go on. Where do you start? Perhaps if I start here, it's going to take me a little while to work towards your question. So if we look at Steiner's theory of the evolution of consciousness, if we go back just a couple of thousand years ago to ancient Greece, it's like and ancient Egypt and beyond, what we find there is evidence of a completely different type of consciousness, the intellectual consciousness that we are all strongly endowed with, thanks to the lives that we've led and the education systems that we've been through. They were only beginning to be born, in the Greek minds there, in the philosophers. So just there, we've got an understanding that the Greeks, the ancients, they had a completely different type of consciousness. And this is something that is, Steiner uses the term, it's picture consciousness or imaginative consciousness. I'll develop that in a second, which is where this idea that if we, when we are not deeply rooted into our own egoity, then we are able to connect with the whole. It's like if we think about the Plato, the world soul, that we have all, we're split off. In Christianity, we're children of God. It's like in the East, we're sparks of the divine. This type of idea, we are all microcosms of this macrocosm. And when our ego sense of self was a lot weaker, entrance back into that or connection with that whole was so much easier. And it was natural. There was a natural clairvoyance. So the Greeks and the Egyptians and beyond, they didn't make up these gods. They saw them. It's like in from this perspective. And quite clearly, we're not in that world now. The best that we can manage is we can like have intellectual thoughts about what these people said that they used to see. And this, we are in what Steiner would call like the intellectual consciousness. We are in now in the consciousness soul age. And what does that mean from a Steiner perspective? It means that having gone through like this intellectual development, this strong development of self, which was something that in the past, with all initiation processes, was selected as damped down so that it didn't interfere with the illumination process. Instead, we are living in a time where we have to using meditation, bringing will into our thinking life, we have to transform this ability to, through our own willpower. But it's not through our own willpower. Sorry, it's so tricky to talk about these concepts when there's two aspects going on at the same time, which are part of the truth, and they seem like they're contradictions. They seem koan-like, but it's only because if we don't see the whole, then they seem like they're contradictory. So in this consciousness soul age, our goal is to become aware, as like have a direct experience of our own spiritual nature, despite living in a material body. So it is possible through various techniques to become aware of a deeper inner life that is independent of the material life. When I say independent, I mean it's not an emergent property of it. I don't mean it doesn't have anything to do with it. What I mean is there is spiritual reality, which is real, and there is matter reality, and that is real. And we as soulful beings, we live between these two realms. And that in the evolution of consciousness, the anthroposophical perspective, is the goal of humanity now, to wake up to this: I am an unborn, immortal being. And that takes practice, and that is deeply linked. This is why I'm so drawn to Aurobindo as well, because I see him using a completely different language, saying exactly the same thing. Not only is he saying this, not only is he using a different language, he's coming from a completely different tradition. So Steiner, he's working out of predominantly the German idealism. It's like the whole thought world around that, and he's taking it to a new height. And Aurobindo is taking Advaita Vedanta, and the Eastern thinking, which is like Gary can philosophy. This is like as a fundamental part of where Theosophy is in its thinking, and we're finding them triangulating on this waking up to this eternal being that lives within us. I'd like to just finish off with what is a key sentence for me, and it might need to be unpacked at a later time, but there are lots of very interesting sentences. One of Steiner's works called The Philosophy of Freedom. It's one of his seminal works. And that sentence is, I live by the grace of thinking. And when you begin to realize that you can say nothing about yourself nor life without the ability to think, you begin to get a different relationship to what thinking is, and that can be deepened. And from a Steiner perspective, It's this intensification of this process, this activity that is living in us, that is an essential part of this ascent towards the supermind. I hope that was a. Did I answer your question there, Don? I went up. Good.
Gary.
Hey, just following on from what Angus said, a couple of things in terms of what Jung calls archetypes or divine ideas. Theosophy would relate divine ideas to the intent of the great solar consciousness, which we're a part of, their evolutionary ideas. And throughout the ages, humanity has sought to understand the divine ideas through the various pantheons of gods that humanity has created. This is a way to understand the archetypes, to access and utilize their energies. And it's worth noting here, it was a saying that used to confuse me: as we evolve, the gods evolve. But it basically means our understanding of the archetypes and the solar consciousness evolves. I wanted to say that if anyone's familiar with Roberto Assagioli's work, he was a contemporary of Jung, and he elaborated upon the collective unconscious with the superconscious, my buddy, yeah, and the Atman, and middle unconscious and the lower, where the id, the shadow, etc. is. But he very much emphasized the importance of will. Not my will be done, but thy will be done, whereby through our understanding of spiritual teachings, we seek to implement the divine will. And the more that we do this, the more we follow our spiritual disciplines, the more we become aligned to the divine intent. I liked Angus's comments about spirit and matter. And of course, we are here to express the perfect interplay between the two, which of course is very, very challenging. This is the squaring of the circle, the quadratura circuli of the alchemist, which is the individuation of Jung. It's also the Buddha at the immovable spot, the interface between the divine and manifestation. Obviously, we're talking about very advanced states of consciousness here, and this is what Don began the presentation with, saying, have we actually experienced these? But I believe that's what we're here to do, but not for our own benefit, but for that of evolution. That, of course, is the Bodhisattva path of the Buddhists. I just wanted to throw that in, try to be as concise as I possibly can. It's a very complex subject, of course.
I agree with you on that, Gary. It is quite a complex subject and something that's very hard to describe. And that's why I liked some of the things mentioned, especially in this particular chapter of Sri Aurobindo, where although he does maintain that there are many different pathways of evolution and lines of transitions, but at the same time, he draws out like some salient hallmarks of an evolutionary process. And one of them being like the complete abandonment of mind and some of these ideas and intellectual observations that mind comes up with, and that to be replaced by a more intuitive and kind of like a direct truth consciousness. I was wondering if anyone here would like to, I know we talk about evolutionary process and there are many ways to move towards it. It's very vague, but are there any like hallmarks in that process? And this is not like just from Sri Aurobindo's point of view. It could be Steiner or Theosophy or Carl Jung. Is there such a thing as some kind of hallmarks of this evolutionary path?
Well, I would say that there are two possible answers in this sense. First of all, I think on the one hand, we must always remember that whatever kind of spiritual path we are speaking, it's very dependent, subjectively dependent. Everyone is a different person, has a different path, and has, well, so in a sense, I would say one cannot say these are the hallmarks and this is a path equal for everyone. On the other side, and so I might connect also to something that has been already said, but I would like to deepen further. There are hallmarks that can come from two parts, from the spiritual or from the psychic, I think, to use the Aurobindonian nomenclature.
You explain what
psychic is the soul. Huh? Yeah.
I want to ask
psychic being is, according to Aurobindo, is a soul which has the. However, it is a bit distinct from the classical understanding of the soul in the Western culture, and which is also an evolutionary soul. It evolves with the physical evolution, and there is also a soul evolution. So it's not just a static soul, but it's something that is dynamic from. Of course, here you are in this paradigm of the transmigration of life from life to life, from and reincarnation theory. So as far as I can see, actually the dominant kind of spiritual hallmark that we are seeing, and also a ferocious backlash to this, is a sort of psychic opening in the collective. I think we can see nowadays that there is a struggle, a battle, I would say, a sort of more or less occult war between a society that tends to open itself to less selfish understanding of society, to a more how can I say, which feels the interconnectedness of all the human beings as one whole human family, and I would say of all life also. And there is, however, this comes also with a back reaction, where you have a part of society that instead clings at an egoistic view that has no empathy. I think this is a hallmark of the evolution of the society as a whole. At the individual level, there can be different paths. In my case, it's perhaps more the spiritual kind of, the intuitive kind of guy who tries to connect the, how Gary's also said, the abstract thought, and to elevate it to higher forms of thought. And I think also that nowadays, to complement this psychic evolution, this psychic awakening of the soul, must be also complemented with a spiritual evolution of the higher intuitive planes of our being, of our nature. And this is a bit lacking nowadays. I think we need philosophical conversations like these, even though we must always be careful that we need also a lot of discrimination, of distinction, of sort of discernment that is not so easy to have. And here also another last thing that I would like to add to this is also a hallmark is becoming aware of things that you can't explain with a rational mind, but when you read these things like the ascent towards supermind and also other spiritual teachings, of course, that you open yourself to what Aurobindo called the environmental consciousness, which is that thoughts, feelings, impulses, low or higher, whatever kind of, are all present in the world atmosphere, and you can feel it in yourself. That connection, it's not something that comes from the mind. It does not even come from the psychic or the spirit, it's something that you have around you and you feel the contact with others without being directly aware of it. Just to make a very specific example, so to drag it down to the rational, there are thoughts that come to our minds and that it's extremely difficult to understand something. But when you see that this thought comes into the collective, and also almost immediately you begin to understand it instinctively, as if the fact that others, the whole world is thinking about something, it makes it easier to understand. This is also something that has been scientifically tested a bit. Of course, scientists will never speak of environmental consciousness. They will try to find some other escapade. But I think these kind of phenomena, becoming aware of this, is also one of the possible hallmarks of evolution, spiritual evolution.
If Marco and I have anything to say about it, scientists are going to get there soon. They'll get there, Marco. I want to build up on what Marco said about the psychic being and the spirit, and Suma's question about evolutionary, landmarks. Just want to correct something or add something really quickly. So Sri Aurobindo is often thought of when people first hear him as like Indian or Eastern. So at age 5 in 1877, his father was a doctor and a great self-described Anglophile. Sent him to England to live with relatives with strict instructions. Do not let him have any contact with any of this old Indian stuff. He wants him to be modern. So he grew up Christian. He was baptized at 9. He loved European poetry. He taught himself Italian to read Dante in the original, German to read Goethe, and French, I forget what poet. And in 1985, I heard there's a scoring system at Cambridge where he studied Greek and Latin. As of 1985, no one in the previous 100 years had attained his level of score in Greek and Latin. And if you read Life Divine, you think that's just Victorian style, those long sentences. A friend of mine years ago, who was a Greek scholar, said, this sounds so much like Plato and Socrates and Aristophanes that it sounds very much, it's very Greek. So he has a very, very strong Western background. And Life Divine really is not Eastern or Western. So that's one thing. I want to make a point which I think fits with Suma's. If you look at Suma's videos, there's a lot of them with non-dualists. And a lot of them go back to Nisargadatta. And I'm sure there's a lot of people here watching who are like, I don't care about ascent and levels. It's all just awareness, right? Okay. There's a famous exchange. Sri Aurobindo's commenting on Maharshi, Ramana Maharshi, who says, all that stuff about the divine coming down, divine's here. That's it. It's just all the divine, right? So I've had this conversation with non-dualists for decades. I want to say, yes, I think when Marco, if you want a really easy way to understand, I think it's valid to understand the self. There is a way of when the mind is silent and you can't make any verbal distinctions, there is a way of opening to recognizing I am consciousness, I am awareness. And in that realization, which by the way, Sri Aurobindo says, before you ascend to the higher mind levels, or even talk about the supramental, you absolutely have to recognize yourself as that vast, boundless, open awareness. And that the first stage actually is often dualistic, and then to recognize, remember Adyashanti talked about after that initial realization, oh, you saw, and everything is awareness. And he saw it, he didn't think it, he saw it, right? So that first step, I know non-dual, there's no steps, it's just one thing. That first opening, this has been recognized. The first thing Krishna taught Arjuna, the first thing, the second chapter in Bhagavad Gita, was you're a pure consciousness. Don't worry about killing these other people. They're all forms of consciousness. First step. Now, the Gita goes on for 17 chapters. Non-dualists don't want to hear about it. Oh, it's all the same. Shankara said it's all illusion. I'm going to leave you with a thought about steps. Mother made a distinction between three kind of spiritual paths through the ages. One is where, and if this is not just India, you can find it a lot in the West too, where basically once you realize God or the Godhead or the divine, all these appearances, they're beautiful, they're kind of an illusion. Only God, only Brahman is real. The second path is more tantric, Tibetan Buddhism, where not only do you realize yourself and everything as awareness, but this is a dynamic, radiant play of luminous, divine reality. We're not yet talking about evolution. Right? It's just everything is what it is. And you'll find 90% of the paths you find today, read all the non-dual people, Tibetan Buddhist, Christian, all these new centering prayer people. And in Theosophy and Steiner are different. They're different, but most of the paths that are popular, it's like there's no evolution. You just realize it. You may develop your thinking, whatever. And the big thing now is therapy. Integrate your personality around the self, which the illusionists hate that idea. No integration necessary. And the third path, so one is illusion, one's a dynamic reality, and the third is evolution. This is new in the last 2 centuries. It's not Darwinian. Sri Aurobindo saw it in the Vedas and the ancient Hebrew and other scriptures, but as a hint, that there is a difference. There is a realization of the soul or psychic being. And I'll leave you a little note a friend of mine wrote. A friend of mine is a Tibetan Buddhist meditation teacher in the tradition of Shambhala, Chagyam Trungpa. And she loves discussions of emptiness. She loves talking about Rigpa and Dzogchen and the other day she posted something from Thomas Merton and she said to me, sometimes I just want that rich heart quality. Now the non-dualists will all the same, but they're, if Sri Aurobindo knows anything, and Theosophists and Steiner told us too, there's a difference. When you approach things through pure non-dual awareness, there is an impersonal quality. And when you open up to that soul quality, which Marco was saying, even if you just have glimpses of it in the universe, in the society, there's this quality of intimacy and aliveness and personal. And when you begin, my understanding of my experience, Myreene communicates it so beautifully, when you're doing spiritual practice and you come across a crisis. I just had 5 teeth removed for oral surgery. They didn't tell me they cut a nerve. So now my lower lip is going to be numb for the rest of my life. And I'm calm now, but when I first heard it, they sent me an email the day before saying, oh, you might lose sensations. Like, I become the ego done, like, oh my God, And when you calm down and get quiet, you get quiet, like Myreene, at some point had this series of dreams where she knew suddenly I'll bet Myreene that once you knew and you knew you had to do this and take care of her, there's a certain kind of calm and trust that takes over. I have to do this for my daughter. So that's a psychic being. It's a sense of beauty and love and connection and intimacy. So you non-dualists out there, it's not just all illusion. Okay.
Okay, I can come in if nobody else wanted to say something. Still on this topic of hallmarks, and also sticking with the topic of thinking as a means of overcoming duality, because when you develop a deeper relationship to this activity, spiritual activity of thinking that lives in you, once it's like moved beyond sort of like being used to identify things in the world, we're using it as a tool to understand the world. This activity can actually, it can be transformed through strengthening exercises, concentration, and meditation. One of the experiences that you can have is like a direct experience, as opposed to it's like something that we might take on trust, is this experience of when I am deep in thinking, with my thinking, I encompass ever more of the world. And I think even if there isn't just like a direct experience of that through deepening, I think people can intuitively feel how with my thinking, it's like I can, how can I describe it? Let's say, for example, a tree outside there. Our normal relationship is to that tree is outside there. And that's obviously, that is a statement of fact. But that's only one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is that that tree is living within my activity, namely of thinking and sight. And as I broaden myself conceptually to the world, as I delimit myself from like purely materialistic interpretations of reality, my own sense of being begins to grow and expand. You could describe it perhaps as like a putting back together of these, or the microcosm recognizing it's like a macrocosm that lives within it. Might be an image that we could use there. So this is one of the developments that can happen. It's like in your inner life. It's like this activity begins to live a lot more strongly and leads you to a fundamentally different relationship, or the possibility to have a fundamentally different relationship compared to our normal relationship to applying thinking to, it's like solving problems in life and analyzing things and being intellectual. Another.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Another aspect in this thinking path is the concept of living thinking. So, what is living thinking? Someone like Goethe here is like a particularly interesting character to use as a description. So if you look at what Goethe did in the field of botany, he created what the Urpflanze is, like the archetypal plant. And what was this? Okay, park that question because I'll tell you what it's not. Okay, and then I'll tell you what it is. So at the same time as Goethe is living, there's a guy, Swedish scientist called Linnaeus. He was the guy that's like went around to like chopping up the world, or chopping up like all the different species of plants and giving them all of their Latin names. So doing a real good, proper intellectual job of it's like separating out everything, and so like saying that's a dandelion, that's a rose, and this is a different species of that rose, and this is a different species of that dandelion, etc. etc. Chop, 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 chop. Goethe, he's working from this polar opposite direction, that there is something that is common to all of these plants. What is that? And with a living thinking, you've got something that does the opposite of cutting things up and separating. It's something that's able to unify things back in, that still has sort of like all this flowing forms and life in it, but you're back to like this root idea, this archetypal form, for it's like a Platonic term, which becomes the basis for everything that's a phenomena. So hallmarks from the perspective that I'm most familiar with would be deepening of the experience, not the product, but the experience of thinking, and then enlivening that thinking, creating a flexibility in thinking and an ability to connect things that the intellect would otherwise compartmentalize.
I'd like to ask you a question, Angus. I think you did a beautiful evocation, and Marco knows Goethe, Steiner, and Goethe very well too, and heard what you're saying. You evoked a sense of opening to a higher mind way of seeing. Paul Brunton once wrote a 800-page book saying the entire book is really a meditation on the phrase, I see a tree. What does that mean? So I'm wondering for viewers, they're going to hear all you're saying and still think, oh, that's just intellectual. So I want to take the phrase and ask you to expand, but so the feeling is, okay, I'm sitting here, I'm here in this body, my brain is sort of constructing thoughts, they're based on my past knowledge, and I'm going to look at this object over there, which is entirely separate from, I mean, people know about neuroscience. There's like supposedly light waves, leave all that. What is different? I'm just asking you to repeat and rephrase for people who haven't heard it before. What is different about, why is it not just intellectual? Just what you're saying was that I'm seeing a tree, my being's expanding, it's experiencing. Isn't that just sort of new age waffle? What is that? Is that really something beyond? I'll just say, what might it mean? Is what you're saying relate to seeing the tree mythologically or seeing it astrologically as an inseparable part of the cosmos? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it is. I can understand anybody that struggles to understand what I just said. I fully sympathize with you. I fully sympathize with you. And this is where meditation, concentration, prayer, whatever your chosen method is, becomes an essential part. Because what happens as your inner life becomes stronger, you start to experience how, yes, my eyes are telling me that's outside, but all of the thoughts that I'm having about it and my feeling relationship to that, and so like the concepts that I've got going on, it's like sap rising, it's like leaves growing on the tree, all of that type of thing. Where is that happening? It's happening in my consciousness. That's where it's happening. So I can, anybody who says that I'm wrong, all they're doing is they're only understanding half of the description. And I fully understand why they would do that. But the other side is coming around and sort of like saying, no, every thought, every feeling that Angus, you are having about that tree is living within your own being. And that they cannot deny, because if it wasn't, they wouldn't be aware of it. I don't know if that was that a good enough repetition there, Don? Did I?
Yeah.
Go ahead. And Gary.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, it was a nice little synchronicity that Marco appeared on screen there, because I wanted to comment on what he said regarding us each having our own existential psyche, our own evolutionary history, our own spiritual purpose. So we follow our own path. We have all these wonderful teachings. And of course, Don, quite brilliantly, in a very succinct manner, has listed the Vedanta path, the Tantra, and the evolutionary one he mentioned, referring to Theosophy, Steiner, etc. It made me think of the myth where the knights at Camelot obtain a partial vision of the Grail, so they abandon their noble and onerous life as the medieval equivalent of rock stars, and they go into the forest of adventure, the inner psyche, in pursuit of the Grail. But what is emphasized here, which relates to what Marco is saying, is that each knight enters the forest at their own chosen path, which had not been trodden before. And this symbolically tells us we all follow our own path. We've got these wonderful teachings we can utilize, but this is very, very important. Regarding duality in the mind, I'm very hung up on myths, but Jason quests for the golden fleece, the spiritual gold of the alchemist, the individuation of Jung. And at one point, he has to sail through the Symplegades, the clashing rocks. The lower mind understands things by means of comparison. We're in a dualistic world, but spiritual truth lies beyond the opposites. So the Argo has to go beyond those clashing rocks. They release a dove, which has its tail feathers damaged slightly, but that tells him how to go to get through. The dove relates to Inanna, Aphrodite, and others. This is Venus in esoteric astrology, the ruler of Gemini, unification of opposites, divine syzygy, and so on. You can maybe say that might sound a bit schizophrenic, but that is how abstract thought works if you're using a key like esoteric astrology. I'm going a bit off tangent. I just wanted to mention symbolism in terms of what Marco said with our existential psyche and what everyone's been saying, you know, in terms of transcending the lower mind and the world of duality.
There's only one thing where I prefer to use, instead of abstract thought, because when people think, when one speaks of abstract thought, people usually think at a purely analytic, mathematical reason that dissects, separates, and is materialistic, physicalist, reductionist. I prefer perhaps spiritual thought or intuitive thought. But anyway, I agree with you and also with what Angus and Don said. And if I may just refer about a personal conversation with some people that had just recently, where the big question, philosophical question was, is the mind material or is it not? Just a classical, typical question of the philosophy of mind. And among these people were also physicists, scientists, very smart people. And I asked a simple question, what does it mean that something is material? Material is already a concept in our mind. It's something that already an abstraction in itself. And yeah, yeah. May I complete the last thing, because I had an interruption here. But it was a good interruption because I changed my mind about how to talk about the mind. So I take another example. I was making an example, but it's a bit more contrived. This one is perhaps a bit easier to tell in few sentences, concisely. When we speak about thinking intuitively, spiritually, etc., without having already these supermind realizations, etc., what it also means, it is an ability to take the first-person perspective. Because our materialistic mind, rational, analytic mind, always projects outside of us the things out there. Whereas this intuitive thinking, it's still a thinking, but it's more subtle still, already a bit, goes inwards, which means that we become aware of how certain categories that we use are, well, projections, not real. So let me make an example. For example, when I see also very trained scientists, neuroscientists, very smart people, and they say, for example, that when we sleep, we become unconscious. Well, I ask, how do you know that? Do you never dream? When you dream, there is still a subject that has some sort of experience. Maybe it is a confused experience. It's something very different qualitatively. But there is someone having an experience. You are not totally unconscious. Yeah. So you see that also very smart people, for the first time in their life, questioned, had to think about that. Why? Because they always take the third person perspective. Like when they see someone sleeping on a bed, they see out them a body that doesn't move and seems to be unconscious. But when you take the first person perspective, you understand that, well, okay, but when I sleep, my ego, if you wish, I have dreams. So it's not so easy as that. But then they say, oh, but okay, but when you don't have dreams, you are totally unconscious. I say, how do you know that? maybe you don't remember. When you wake up, you might have had experiences. So think about it more carefully. But to understand this, you have to take this first person perspective, because unless you don't do that, you will probably don't understand what I'm talking about. No? And so there are a lot of examples of this kind on which we built an entire scientific castle, especially in neuroscience and psychology. Psychologist Don tells me that psychologists have become more conscious, more aware. So I don't talk about, but there is still a lack of ability to go inwards. This could be the first step to take this first person perspective and to say, okay, now we have analyzed it with a third perspective looking outside, let it analyze it looking inside or from the inside. And then we see things are, in a sense that more complex, but also much more revealing. An entire universe opens that has its complexity, but not so much really if you are able to have a holistic perspective that is able to unite the third with the first person perspective. And that's the great challenge of our modern reason, analytic mind, I think. So this was a bit the message that I wanted to give.
I'd like to really come in there. I think you said something really important there, Marco, the first and third person perspective, because rightly we should laud science for all of the amazing achievements and it's like in our understanding of the world and creating this as far as we can objective picture of the world. But when it comes to the spiritual, it's exactly the opposite that we've got to do. It is the journey inwards. It's the journey like deeper into the microcosm, if I continue to play on that image, that will actually reveal this greater truth that we live in. And so that becomes an immense challenge. So it's something that has been so successful for humanity for so long. We're saying, no, you've got to go in the other direction, guys. And it's not a popular message. And it's very understandable, the reluctance too, because come on, show me some evidence. Well, you've actually got to start traveling down that path yourself. You've got to start becoming, it's like intellectually honest. Suma mentioned a very key word here from this chapter, this truth consciousness. It's like this dedication, this desire to slowly, step by step, walking towards the truth, rather than coming to knowledge based on authority, which is obviously a major part of the scientific project, because we can't all do quantum physics and we can't all do evolutionary biology and we can't all do all of these special areas. So we take authority there. But in the spiritual realm, and this might be where it's like some of us differ, I'm not sure, but certainly within anthroposophy, and so there's a strong element of personal freedom in there. It means that we have to, when it comes to inner experiences, we have to reject an outer authority. And it is all about strengthening the inner self, an honest investigation of one's own experiences of life, which is the path forward towards the supermind, towards, in Steiner terms, imaginative, inspirational, and intuitive consciousness. But I thought you brought up an important point there, Marco, so I just wanted to emphasize that. Thank you.
Gary and Myreene, do you have anything to add to that, to the hallmarks of evolutionary process, maybe from theosophical or Carl Jung perspective?
You put me on the spot now. If I could
Me
say
too.
something light-hearted, in terms of Marco mentioning a scientific castle, the psyche works by making associations. So I immediately thought of the Jimi Hendrix song, Castles in the Sand, that drift into the sea eventually, i.e. emphasizes ephemerality. That's something a bit light-hearted. In terms of evolution, Theosophy talks about the evolution of the solar logos, which spiritually we're all a part of, and the evolution of the planetary consciousness, what it refers to as the planetary logos. Our planet is not considered particularly advanced. I think we just have to look around at what's going on in our world to agree with that. Was it Don or was it Marco that mentioned about psychic openings in the collective and a battle, kind of like Kurukshetra between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, where people are awakening to spiritual realities, whereas other people seem to be more obsessed with power and dominance in the world, whether it's dominance within their own home or dominance within a country or beyond. And I think in terms of evolution, there has to be a sea change in human consciousness whereby we become aligned to the evolutionary intent. I think we talk of the 7 rays, they're the ultimate archetypes, and we have the first ray of will and power, which relates to the Hindu Shiva. And I think we really need the Shiva aspect at the moment to destroy the dead wood to make way for the new. I think this is important. I don't think waiting for a God on high to do it. I think it has to come from within us all, individually and collectively, to bring this about. And I mean, we have such wonderful spiritual teachings throughout our world, and it's been a pleasure participating here and listening, to people not just expounding different paradigms, but utilizing them to convey spiritual truths. And it is all there. We need a revolution in consciousness. That's what I'm trying to say, not a revolution in arms. This is very, very important, I think. Our planet has to function as a spiritual expedient. I'm a man of few words at times, so spiritual expediency. All our systems should reflect that: political, economic, social, and so on.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I'm studying in this idea of deep time and deep ecology, which is putting forth the idea that we need a new story. Our story is not working anymore. And all the components that were discussed here are all truths, and they're all pieces of each of these things that I deeply resonate with. But you're very, very right. We do need that new story. And in broad strokes, what I'm learning, and I had an intuition and an insight because I fell upon this one book that was suggested to me. It was called Cosmogenesis by Brian Swim that I mentioned earlier. And he says some things that are like those little zingers that are a quarter turn, and you go, wow, I need to pay attention to this. And he talks about scientific proof of the Big Bang, where we started as an atom and it expanded out. And I'm doing some other studies with Fritjof Capra out of Berkeley in California. And he has taken us all the way from the origins of one-celled living organisms up to, Homo sapiens, as we are now. And both of these lines of thoughts are teaching that we are the universe evolving, and we are evolving our consciousness so that the universe may be aware of itself. And I know that I've been steeped in this for the last few months, and it makes good sense to me. And all of the components that we're talking about today are in that. And it talks about the universe being creative and always being looking for novelty. And it talks about us being all part of a matrix where we are all one in actual fact. And what else did I want to say? That we are differentiated and we are subjective. And the universe, just as all of us are expressing different ways this morning, the universe captures all of our differentiation. And I have my ideas, each of you have your ideas, and we're each individual consciousness combining or coalescing. And the universe is with us and within us, and we are within it. And literally, we do come from stars. And we've talked about how that evolution has taken place. And we do need a new story, because the main reasons, some of the main reasons, not just for our own growth and development and ongoing evolution, but man has gotten us to a space where we have desecrated our systems of the earth, and we are into climate change, and we are into desalination of the oceans, and we are into deforestation, and all of those things will not be changed unless we evolve as individuals and evolve our consciousness. That makes us understand that we all need to be together and bring all that we each have together to create this.
Myreene, I want to thank you for bringing in the environmental, the societal, and the new story. Psychology has allegedly, since 1977, supposed to be bio-psycho-social. So you're taking into account the body, the mind, and society. It's rarely society. This is connected with this larger topic that, I think this new story, new consciousness is going to have to be opening both to the soul and the higher mind. We're not going to see everything as one in the new story. So to tell you a quick story about that, two things. I want to get back to non-dual awareness too. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was doing a psych evaluation with a 13-year-old boy with like a 65 IQ, which is like that of a 7-year-old. And he had ADHD, and it was just violent. He's smart enough to know he's not as smart as everyone else. It just made him constantly angry at everybody. He was just constantly violent, tearing things apart. And I could see he's not going to be open to any, my job was to recommend therapy for him. He's not going to be open to any therapy, not behavioral stuff. He'll learn techniques. And in the course of talking, his mother said, there's one time when he's not only calm, he's joyful. She would take him once a week to see his grandmother in a nursing home. And he's so happy there. He would actually spend hours there bringing things to all the patients, talking to them. And I said, can you get him to go there more often? She said, I'll try. Within a few weeks, years of bad behavior had totally changed. So to me, that was touching his soul. It may be an intimation. Yes. It's connecting him to a larger meaning and purpose. And like Marco said earlier, there is this awakening in the world where people are touching their soul. Yes. There's a less common awakening where people are learning to think differently, as people are saying. My final comment, Marco talked about psychologists being more open. there's a distinction which I think relates to the whole world, symbolic here. So when I tell people I'm a psychologist, the first thing is like, oh, I better be careful. You're probably analyzing me. It's like, I'm not a therapist. And most people don't know there's a whole realm of psychology, which is pure research. Among all scientists, the most rigidly analytic, materialistic, and anti-parent, they're research psychologists.
I said it because I didn't want to upset you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yes. They all have physics envy. They feel like they're not real scientists. Like, no, I'm a scientist. I don't believe in anything. Mine is all nonsense. But now this is, if you look at non-dualism and look at what profession will you find most represented among non-dual teachers? Therapists, psychologists. There's huge numbers. Some of them are the just wake up type, that's it. Others are, we need to integrate, but a few are talking about things related to the higher mind, the psychic being, just a few. So I think this split in psychology and psychotherapy is symbolic of all these things we've talked about in society. There's this backlash there's a new age backlash against the mind. Just open, you'll feel everything. And I think a lot of the conspiracies, a lot of the delusions are very much people opening to these occult realms without any discipline, there's this whole occult, you know what I'm talking about, this occult infusion of total insanity. I often feel like when I'm talking to people like that, I remember at Bellevue Hospital in New York, I had an internship, and the first person came to me and said, she was in the midst of a psychosis, I know you, you're my lawyer. This is where you have to say, you don't argue, you say, oh, yeah, I used to be a lawyer, but now I've become a psychology student. Oh, okay, she was fine with that, right? So that's how to talk to conspiracy crazy people. But so there's this opening to the occult, there's this opening of the soul, there's this understanding, Myreene, I love that everyone senses our story's not working. We need a new story, but it can't just be mental, it has to be with the, whatever the modern form of astrological intuition is going to be, where you see the connection of the planets and stars in our lives. And what Angus describes so beautifully, if everyone on the planet just learned to see trees as part of their being, we probably have a new era right away. It's like, just look at a tree, look at the damn tree. It's not just a tree.
I want to add that what you're saying about the things that you're seeing these days, I think that your profession is like, what word do I want to use? I think you're in a really good position as you do your work with people to get a feeling of the pulse of what's going on, of that opening, of that legitimate growth and needing. One of the other things that I'm going to try to relate when I say this is other things that I'm learning in this body of knowledge is that he said, or in this book, Cosmogenesis, and I've read a ton of others, but he is saying that it used to be that people had a sense that scientists did something to the universe. Oh, scientists have discovered blah, blah, so they can do this. And actually, it is the universe that has always existed in infinity, and the scientists are just finding out its properties. And they feel that in the last 100 years, they've learned more than they did for the previous 400 years. The other thing that I wanted to add was that scientists and mathematicians all thought that all understanding of the universe could be captured in mathematical equations. And as they map this, I thought this was really beautiful, they're finding that with new technologies that are becoming very, very sophisticated, for one thing, they can see farther out into the universe. They used to think there was only one galaxy. Now they know there are millions or even maybe billions. But I've lost my train of thought now. The data as it is captured shows up in fractals, not linear, but in fractals. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah. May I add something about this thing of science and spirituality, spiritual thinking, etc.? I think we should not make the mistake I'm not saying that anyone here was implying that. I'm making a general comment. But what I see very often is that we make then the mistake that it is us versus them, science versus who's thinking in a spiritual way, etc. It's not at all. Just to use the Aurobindonian nomenclature, it's about thinking integrally, where science and spirituality are not opposites, but even not, we can go perhaps so far that even not complementaries, but they have to somehow come together and become something else entirely. But this is very, very futuristic. But at this stage, we have to put this together. And let me make a practical example, because just you just mentioned the environmental issue. Yeah. But I leave aside for a moment the climate change denial movement. This is another. It's also an interesting aspect that means a lot, I think, from a spiritual perspective. But let me point at those people who are very environmentalists, but think in a purely technocratic way of how we can fix these issues that we have today with climate change, with emissions, and so on. There is, unfortunately, this tendency to believe that it will be fixed everything by technology, which is true in a sense. I'm 100% for solar, wind, and whatever kind of technologies, clean technologies, renewables that can help us to fix this problem. But my impression that this is also something that evolution, that nature brings into the play with its catastrophic consequences by purpose to force us not to think only in technological means, but also in spiritual, having this spiritual perspective of nature. Because if we think that we will be able to fix these environmental issues only with technology alone, this will not work. We will have to acquire also this inner contact with nature that tells us that we are not divided. We are here and nature is there. We are part of nature. And if this will not come through, I suspect that we will have a lot of troubles, despite all the technological advances that there will be. So, and this is something that, my impression is that we have a lot to work on. But it was just an example to show how the third-person perspective of science has to meet the first-person inner perception of the spiritual mind, if you would like to call it like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They inform each other, and it has to come from our spiritual nature to join us together.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we discussed a lot of different point of views today in this conversation, and I want to be, I can talk with all of you forever, but I want to be mindful about all of your time. I just want to wrap up by saying that I have gotten a lot out of this conversation today, and what stands out for me is that this is quite a complex path of evolution. It's not only going in the opposite direction where going from an intellectual based mind to an intuitive mind, but also at some point dissolving that distinction between intuition and intellect, an amalgam of that. From the outside world, it seems like even for the intuitive mind, some of the examples that we see in especially in the New Age world, sometimes it can be intuition that's coming off of mind, but is perceived as intuition. So there's a lot of like nuances we have to kind of go through to progress on this path. Thank you for discussing all those minute nuances in evolutionary path, and I'll let you all share your closing thought for this conversation.
Oh, I'll take two quick ones. A quick one is a little follow-up on psychologist Jim Carpenter, the clinical psychologist who developed that parapsychology theory of first sight. We had some brief correspondence. He said, among therapists, clinical therapists he's talked to, and he's talked to thousands, he's never come across one who hasn't been aware of all the things we're talking about, intuitions, parapsychological realizations. They don't talk about it much, but there's 500,000 therapists in the United States alone. Probably a good 70–80% have had these experiences. And my sense is, if you want to get across an incredibly large group of people who reach millions of people, that's why I had much more fun being a musician, by the way, but I went into psychology for this purpose. I felt like these are people who you can reach, who know this stuff. The last thing I'm still imagining a lot of people in the non-dual world are coming to this video. I want to say something about Aurobindo's incredible openness. He said constantly, if you feel your calling is primarily to wake up to the recognition of yourself as consciousness, he would not argue with them or challenge them. This is your calling. So I just want to say, for those people who've gotten to who thank you for watching this far. If you're still thinking like, just wake up. Aurobindo, I think everyone here would say, we need people to wake up. That's great.
Angus, Marco, any closing thoughts?
Well, okay. Thank you, Suma, for having given us this place where we can express our thoughts. My concluding thought is to wrap it up together and say it's all about here, at least it's not all about that, but a big part of the discussion that we had here was about integrating intuition with the intellect. And that's, I think, the real challenge for humankind, at least one of the main challenging aspects for humankind in the next future, because it's not about to transcend the mind and the mind has no function. The mind will continue to have its function, its place.
Right.
Because we need also, because intuition without a bit of reason leads to confusion, I think. You can see this in the New Age scene of people who channel or have some whatever kind of occult experience. My impression is that most of them don't have a real discrimination, an ability to discriminate between the dark and the enlightened side. So this is the big challenge, is to unite intuition with reason and elevate reason to the intuitive levels or spiritual levels and give its right place so that we can be guided by both and go beyond that. And this is, I think, a bit the message of this meeting today. Thank you for this, Suma.
Thank you.
Yeah, closing. It's like actually, it's going to be two thoughts. The new story, a suggestion, is an old story. It's Prometheus. Prometheus bound. He was the inspiration. He was very central for the German Sturm und Drang. It's like this literary movement that's like blew up first Germany and then the rest of Europe. It's like changed the world in a certain way. But if we dig into that story, we've got a God that's chained to a rock. He knows he's a God. He knows he's immortal. He knows Zeus is going to punish him. But he also knows that eventually Zeus is going to have to let him go because he's got a secret. I see in us meeting and what you've managed to arrange here, Suma, is a wonderful start that needs to be happening increasingly around the world, that people who are taking their first steps towards, or people are the long way down the path of wanting to move beyond the current paradigm. It's like we live in a material world. People who want to move beyond that, they need to be having these conversations together so that they can flesh out their thoughts, they can compare and they can contrast ideas. It's in these type of interactions that new thoughts are sparked, new understandings. So I just really want to thank you for organizing this talk, because it's community building with people that have got a passion about developing this process of discovery. It's hugely important.
Gary and Myreene, any closing thoughts?
Well, yes, if I can reiterate what Angus just said, well, we're all indebted to you for bringing us together, this wonderful and very stimulating gathering. Angus has helped me greatly here in my little summary. I was simply going to say it's all about spirituality in action, which seems to be Aurobindo's message. But with Angus mentioning Prometheus as a symbol for humanity, we must all release our inner Prometheus. We are chained to a rock where the vulture of the five senses causes us to be fixated on Plato's symbolic cave wall. And we must evoke our inner Heracles, the hero within, as a means of freeing Prometheus to bring about the heaven on earth. So thank you so much. Thanks for everybody. It's been a wonderful gathering, and it's just been great to have people from different fields, different paradigms coming together and sharing our insights. And hopefully it will inspire all of us in our own spiritual endeavors, which of course we do for the benefit of humanity and the planet. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Suma. The work that you do in bringing all of these people to speak with you is amazing, and the world does need to hear that. And I'm going to piggyback on Angus saying that we need to create a community. We all need to bring our own allurements or our attractions on our paths together to create this new story, and to come together and realize we are all one. We're one species. We're one human manifestation of the universe. So thank you all. I really learned a lot today, and I really appreciated being here.
Thank you, everyone.